All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Did a Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we mentioned, or I mentioned in my review of Van Richten's Guide to Everything, that the new races they introduced there are really interesting. But if I want to talk about them, I really need to kind of introduce how races work and lineages will work in D&D 5th edition. So that is what this is the beginning of. Starting with this one, and because there's a fairly large amount of races in the Player's Handbook, probably continuing at least one more, maybe to the two, we are going to be covering the various races in the Player's Handbook and how to get the most out of the options presented that they're in. You know, basically, how to get the most out of your racial traits and features. So, with that, I do want to do kind of a broad overview of exactly what races are in D&D 5th edition. If you've never played Dungeons and Dragons in general, or really most tabletop RPGs have some sort of race or lineage or culture feature that helps you to create your character. Going way back to my first introduction to video game RPGs, specifically MMOs, one of the most common things to hear in old school MMOs was they would ask for your RCL, race, class, level. If you were looking for groups and things like that, you would put your RCL, race, class, level, because your race would affect what you could do. Even in old school games like, EverQuest was my first MMO. And this same thing is true about D&D, going all the way back to the origins, the very first version of the Dungeons and Dragons. They actually had elf was not just a race; it was its own class. As it evolved and everything like that, you started mixing your race and your class to give you different advantages and disadvantages. Earlier versions of D&D had certain classes limited to certain races. By the time you got to the third edition D&D, and I think this may have happened in second. I'm not remembering 100%. I think this is a second edition thing. Different races sometimes leveled differently. I'm relatively certain that was a second edition thing. It might have been in part of third edition to two. I can't remember right now. But yeah, certain races, just because they're kind of inborn advantages, were very, very, very useful. They would start out at a level penalty or a level bonus or things like that, where they would take more experience to level up or things like that. So different races or lineages or whatever you want to call them have been a part of tabletop RPGs since the inception. And getting the most bang out of your buck when you're choosing your race can be very, very useful when you're playing the game. Now, to get into some specifics about 5th edition to the D&D, first things first, any race and class combination can work. 5th edition, because of the limitations placed, like you can't get higher than a 20 in any attribute unless you have a magic item or a class feature that does that for you. means that if your specific race that you choose doesn't give you the right bonuses from the beginning, you can make up for that generally by level 8. You can be perfectly fine even without magic items. However, if you use the base ability score increases in the races, they are going to lend themselves a little bit more towards certain classes. And thank you for the phone. And that is built into a lot of their lore. Things like Dragonborn sorcerers being a very, very common thing for them to do, because Dragonborn gets a bonus to charisma, which is what sorcerers use to cast spells. Things like high elves being aligned very often with wizards. And magic being a very large part of High Elven society is because they get a bonus to their intelligence score. Yeah. So let's kind of break it down. The things that you're going to see in every single race, no matter where you're finding it. The first part of any race description is going to be lore behind it. And for the most part, this lore is based on the Forgotten Realms version of these races. If they are introduced in other books, they will sometimes have subclasses of races that change things slightly because they behave differently in different campaign settings. The Explorer's Guide to Wildmount has a different race called the Orc of Exandria, because Exandrian orcs are a little different than they are in the Forgotten Realms. On that same wavelength, in Eberron Rising from the Last War, there is Orc of Eberron, because again, they're slightly different. And then in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, they actually give you a blueprint as to how to build your own races. We may get to that just to talk about some of the more interesting ways you can build a race. Yeah, right now we're just sticking with the player's handbook. So yeah, the first thing you're going to find is going to be just a couple different sections that describe the culture and kind of the lore behind the race, what you would have kind of experienced growing up as one of these creatures. Then in the player's handbook, I can't be 100% certain this is everywhere, but it's very, very common, as you get a section that gives you names. Something that a lot of people have issues with is just coming up with a name for their character that fits in the world. You know, sometimes it can be, you know, a little bit off-putting if you're, you know, going around, you're going around, you know, Faerun, with Alar, the elf, and Balasar, the Dragonborn, and then Kevin, the tiefling. I don't feel very fantasy. And that's not to say you can't have Kevins and Phils and Freds if you want to. But if you really do want to feel a little bit more, feel a little bit more connected with it, use one of these names. And they're really nice. They will give you first names. They will give you surnames, which, depending on the race, will be called different things. Like for Dragonborn, they have clan names. Instead of like last names or family names, and again, it's all based on the lore that's built in. Now, if you want to, in your campaign setting, have them be completely different, it's perfectly fine. You could ignore all of that stuff and just use the mechanical aspects, or again, you can redesign it all. It's entirely up to you. This will all be based on what is printed in the player's handbook, though, to make things a little easier. The last section of any race is going to be the traits section. This is the actual mechanical benefits of the race. Every single race is going to have some sort of ability score in Kukukrease that just kind of identifies that different creatures are built differently just due to physiology. That doesn't mean that absolutely every single member of this race is the exact same. We see in nature creatures of the exact same species and race and everything like that having vastly different characteristics. You can have two dogs born from in the same litter that can have wildly different physiological aspects to them, where one of them is very, very large and very, very muscular and just strong, and the other one is very, very small but very agile, and they could be literally from the same litter. Lots of variations, but the ability score increase is one of the things that's going to affect you right from the beginning, and it's one of the things that can help you kind of pair your race with your class, because if your ability score and increases work well with the class that you're picking, then you've got a pretty good deal. And again, Xanathar's has rules for, not Xanathar's, Tasha's has rules for modifying the ability score. So you can play a Dragonborn if you like the physical aspects of a Dragonborn. Maybe you want to be, a dragon person, but you're not thrilled with the ability score in Kukukreases. You would much rather be, a Dragonborn Ranger or a Dragonborn Rogue, and they don't get dexterity as either of their things. Well, use Tasha's rules for modifying it. That's fine. Again, this particular version is just going to be, when I'm talking about each race, is just going to be what their base version is. So first you get his ability score. Second, they will talk about age, basically tell you how old is an adolescent, how old is an adult, when do they die. Most of that is role playing, but there are a few spells that age you unnaturally, and if they age you to the point where your character would normally die, your character would die of old age, which presents issues with resurrection, because a lot of resurrection spells can't cure someone of old age. If they resurrected you, you would just die again because your body is just not able to work anymore. I know the PHB ones have an alignment section. They have kind of moved away from this just due to the backlash of people getting upset about quote-unquote evil races. Alignment itself was never meant to indicate something built into their DNA, and was always meant to indicate a little bit more about culture anyways. So kind of moving away from the idea of races are tied to an alignment makes sense, to be honest. You will have a size category. I think just about every single player race is going to be medium. I don't think there's any races that are by default large. I think there might be a couple that can be considered small, though. It'll give your speed. I think almost completely. If you are a smaller race, it's 25 feet. If you are the more average size race, and this has nothing to do with your size, it's like halflings are medium, but they only have a 25-foot speed. Most races are going to have a 30-foot speed. There are a couple that will have a 35-foot speed. I believe wood elves get a little extra boost. Again, being able to move more than other people is a very useful thing, and we'll talk about that as we talk about the specifics. And then you will have racial features. And these are basically specific things about your race that are very, very different. They change depending on the race. Dragonborns get a breath attack. high elves learn a cantrip by default. Tieflings get access to a couple spells. You know, it's different for every single race, and a lot of times different for sub races too. But those features, if you learn how to master them and use them really effectively, can be a huge benefit, and can actually be used to make up for shortcomings of your class or subclass choice. So that's basically. And then the last thing you will have is almost always you'll have a languages section, which basically just tells you what languages you already know. Again, depending on how your DM does it, knowing lots of languages can be extremely useful or can be pointless if everyone always just speaks in English. Or common is the language in D&D. I've seen campaigns where everyone just speaks common and you don't need to know another language, and I've seen campaigns where the more languages you know, just the more powerful you become. So it's entirely up to you and your DM. So let's dive into a few of the races specifically. And again, I'm only going to be going over the traits section because the lore itself, I believe, would be better for a different video series entirely. I generally don't do a ton about lore in my D&D deep dives because this is meant to be what mechanical things can you do to play your class the way you want to. Lore can affect mechanics in some instances, but, you know, it becomes much more interpretive. So let's go ahead and start with the first race in the 5th edition Player's Handbook, the Dragonborn. Dragonborn are literally that. They are humanoids that have draconic heritage of some sort. Depending on the campaign setting, sometimes they are the offspring of dragons and humans. Sometimes they are created by a draconic deity or by dragons themselves. Sometimes they are just humans that have draconic traits. It varies, but they are literally that. If you want to play if you want to put a huge emphasis on the dragon aspect of Dungeons & Dragons, playing a Dragonborn will let you do that. So first things first, the ability score increases. The base ability score increases for the Dragonborn is you increase your strength score by 2 and your charisma score by 1. What this means, a lot of times, is Dragonborn in general, because you get a +2 boost to strength. They tend to make very, very good fighting style and martial classes. Dragonborn fighters, very, very common. Dragonborn paladins are extremely useful because paladins use strength for their attack rolls and they use charisma for their spells. So the kind of quote-unquote perfect class for a Dragonborn is a paladin, because both of their ability score increases work perfectly with that. Now, does that mean the only thing you can do is be some sort of martial class? No. Again, another really common lore thing for Dragonborns to be is sorcerers. Dragonborn sorcerers are a classic Dragonborn character, and because of how 5th edition works, if you roll your stats, good luck to you. You're going to get weird numbers. But if you use if you use the standard array, which is what I make almost every single character I've ever made, I make using this as a standard array just because it works for me. One of the highest score you will put in the standard array is a 15. So all you need to basically get the highest bonus you can at level 1, which is a +3 bonus, is going to be a 15 +1. So even though charisma is only a +1, you can still use it to have a really good first level sorcerer without having to, burn through a feat or something, or ability score improvement to get you up to the place where you're useful. That's the nice thing about fifth edition is even if you don't have a bonus to that, you're only missing 1 point, because you can put the 15 or a 14 in your casting slot or in your attack roll modifier, and not really be that bad off. So again, if you want to have your ability score increases as a Dragonborn synergize with your class, going with a paladin is really, really good. Going with a barbarian is also really, really good because they actually use charisma for intimidation an awful lot. Those are your two absolute perfect. Otherwise, going with a sorcerer or a warlock, which are charisma-based spellcasters, works really, really well. Going as a strength-based fighter works really, really well. Even going as a cleric and being a little bit more martial focused, you don't get a bonus to your wisdom score, but if you take one of the martial focused classes that get a divine smite kind of thing, when they hit a level 8, you can still do pretty decently, and then focus on your wisdom score later on and use it for healing and things like that. Age for Dragonborns, they're kind of interesting because they grow faster than humans. Everything is kind of compared to humans because they're technically considered the default. We'll talk about why when we talk about them. But Dragonborn can walk hours after hatching, and they basically look like a 10-year-old human by age 3, and they reach full adulthood by age 15. So Dragonborn are generally considered a quote-unquote younger race. You can have a 15-year-old Dragonborn that is going to be on the same kind of level as a human in their 20s, or an elf in their 50s or 60s. So playing your Dragonborn as a younger character can be a lot of fun because physically you are a mature adult at 15. However, mentally you may not. You may decide that your Dragonborn ages mentally the same way they do physically, and you are just a very young person with a much more mature attitude. Or you can really play up kind of being the idea of a teenager being in a fully adult body, being able to make fully adult choices for them. That can be a lot of fun to role play. Alignment, again, I'm not going to go into that stuff because it's just not really a thing anymore. You don't, even in the player's handbook, it says you don't have to choose the alignments we mention here. This is just kind of a guideline if you don't know anything. So I'm going to skip those. Size, they stand well over 6 feet tall and average almost 250 pounds. I currently weigh a little over to 250 pounds, and I'm 6'4". So I am Dragonborn sized, if you ever wanted a comparison. But their physical size is medium, which means they take 1 5-foot square, which is how it should work. Base walking speed is 30, again, very standard. Their first feature is what's called Draconic Ancestry. And because it does so much, this is really their only feature for the most part. The other ones just kind of lean off this. Basically, you have to choose which flavor of dragon you could come from. In the player's handbook, there are only chromatic and metallic dragons. If you're not familiar with the difference, in basic D&D rules and canon, chromatic dragons are evil aligned. They're the bad dragons that come around and raise cities, and the enemies have to come together and kill them. Metallic dragons are generally good aligned, so these are nice dragons. Does that mean that if you are a chromatic dragonborn that you have to be evil? No. Again, that's just how they split them up as far as lore is concerned, specifically in the Forgotten Realms, but most D&D campaign settings, chromatics are bad guys, metallics are good guys. What the choice here is a lot of times, again, because you have this ancestry in you, choosing the dragon is going to reflect in your physical appearance, which can be cool. But the big things is you're going to have a damage type and a breath weapon that are linked to your Draconic Ancestry, and that doesn't change throughout it. So choosing your ancestry is really going to change mechanically how you can use this feature. The damage types range from your basic elemental, lightning, fire, cold. You also have a couple that do acid, and then one dragon type that does poison. The other difference is the breath weapon. The first 5 that they list in the player's handbook are going to have line weapons, which means your breath weapon is 5 feet wide, but it goes for 30 feet. And the other breath weapons are a 15-foot cone, which means you breathe a cone out that at its widest point is 15 feet wide and goes out from you 15 feet away. So effectively, you can hit generally 5 people in a 15-foot. Or 1, 2, 3, 6 people. So sorry. You can generally hit about 6 people in a 15-foot cone, depending on how you place it. So what does that mean for you? Again, it's going to mean that you have to use your breath weapon at different times, in different ways. Speaking of breath weapons, basically the Dragonborn have an action they can use to unleash their breath weapon. It takes your action to do it, and they have to make a saving throw. The DC for the saving throw is 8 plus your Constitution modifier plus your proficiency bonus, which is interesting simply because the base Dragonborn does not get a bonus to Constitution. So this does give you an incentive to increase your Constitution, which is good for any class. Constitution equals hit points. So having a high Constitution helps any class. But this means it also makes it that much more difficult for them to avoid your breath attack. If they make the save, they take half damage. If they fail the save, they take full damage. And at base level, at level 1, you do 2d6 to the damage, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you factor in that the breath weapon, even with the lines, you can get at least 2 people hit by your breath weapon, sometimes up to 6 people, 6 creatures. 6 times 2d6 turns into 12d6 damage across the entire team. So you may not be one-shotting anyone with it, but you will be able to do a large amount of damage. The damage does increase at certain levels. At 6 levels, it goes up to 3d6. 11 goes to 5d6. Or 11th level goes to 4d6, and then 16th level goes to 5d6, which is important because as you get higher, creatures have more hit points. It needs to do more damage in order for it to be viable at all, especially since as you get higher, you have other uses for your action that can do more damage. Now, this is a semi-one and done. Once you use your breath weapon, you have to take a short or a long rest. So Dragonborn themselves are actually reliant on short rests, no matter their class. So picking a class that also uses short rests a lot, things like a warlock, benefits really well as a Dragonborn, because you have two different things you're going to get back when you take short rests as a Dragonborn warlock. So those can be really useful. Now, another thing a lot of people won't think of when they're thinking about the breath weapon is specifically what kind of save it is. Almost all of the breath weapons are dex saves. That is what most saves are in against the damage in 5th edition. So dex saves are fine. However, a lot of creatures, especially as higher levels, have very high dexterity scores. There are 3 breath weapons, though, that do not use dex. They use constitution. If you're a green, a silver, or a white Dragonborn, your save will be a constitution save, which there are a lot more creatures that have bad constitutions than there are that have bad dexterities in 5th edition. So if you really want to get to the tricky, picking green, silver, or white will give you a little bit of a bonus as far as surprising enemies and just giving you different options. Again, if you go that traditional Dragonborn sorcerer thing, most of your spells you can cast are going to be dex saves if they are saves. By picking one of those 3, you can go, okay, well, this creature has a really high dexterity. I'm going to use my breath weapon this turn in order to make them have to roll a constitution save and possibly fail, whereas they always make their dexterity saves or something like that. So it does give you options. As far as line versus cone for breath weapons, I tend to prefer cone just because it's easier to get multiple creatures in a cone than it is in a line. Getting more than 2 people in a line is a lot of it's based on luck, unless you have some sort of controller style class on your side that can move enemies for you. Then the line can be really, really useful if you can just line them all up and then, go down the line. Cones just happen to be easier to get more than 2 people in. A line you can always get to 2 people in it if there are 2 people, because there will always, or 2 people within 30 feet of each other, because there is always a line that connects 2 points. A line is the shortest distance between 2 points. By definition, you can get 2 people in a line. More than that is luck a lot of the times. Cones is just easier. And it's a lot more common for enemies to group up than it is for them to naturally go into a little line. The other thing you get that's part of your Draconic Ancestry is you get damage resistance to the same type of damage that your breath weapon does. So again, if you're a silver Dragonborn, your breath weapon is a 15-foot cone that uses a constitution saving throw, and it does cold damage, and you have resistance to cold damage. Now, if you take the elemental adept feat, you can actually improve your breath weapon simply because if you choose the element that is aligned with your damage type for your elemental adept, it means you ignore resistance to that damage type, which is really, really useful. It means that in general, you're never going to have to worry about using your breath weapon and someone being resistant to it. Immunity you can't do anything about, but resistance is fine. It also lets you treat any roll on your damage die that is a 1, you can treat as a 2. So it actually increases your average damage because it's impossible for you to roll 2s. And because you just add additional dice as you get higher and higher in the level, that means your damage just gets that much higher every single time. Dragonborn with Elemental Adept can really get the most use out of their breath weapon. So yeah. Now, introduced in the Explorer's Guide to Wild Mounts are actually 2 variations on the Dragonborn. And what they do is they replace the ability score increases and the damage resistance traits. So I mentioned before, your base Dragonborn, part of their Draconic Ancestry is they get resistance to a type of damage. Well, these two versions are going to play a little bit differently, and they're not going to get that damage resistance. So if you are looking to play a different kind of Dragonborn, these are nice pre-built options for that. First things first, we will start with the Draconblood Dragonborn, which are Dragonborns that have long tails. In Exandria, you have Dragonborns with tails and Dragonborns without tails. And they are from different castes in their society. So the Draconblood Dragonborn, instead of getting the regular ability score increase, which is strength and charisma for normal Dragonborns, they actually increase their intelligence score by 2 and their charisma score by 1. So Draconblood Dragonborn are a little bit more magically inclined. Specifically, Draconblood Dragonborn wizards are really, really good. Because your intelligence score is already increased by 2. And you can still use your charisma score for a lot of other things. You could be a bard with a really good intelligence score. You could even go something like Eldritch Knight. Wow, brain just went gone. An Eldritch Knight. Dragon. An Eldritch Knight. And use the intelligence score for your... I've said Eldritch Knight 4 times now. Use the intelligence score to increase your spellcasting while you're also, killing things. Again, you wouldn't get the natural bonus to strength, but that could also mean that instead of being a strength intelligence Eldritch Knight, you could be a dex intelligence Eldritch Knight and go that route. So yeah, the things that replace the resistance are actually 2 things. One, you get dark vision. Normal Dragonborn don't have dark vision. Dark vision is very, very useful. However, if you go the magic route, you can always cast light with, I think most magic classes get access to the light cantrip. So, but it does mean enemies see you coming. So there's pluses and minuses. But the Draconblood Dragonborn does have dark vision. It doesn't have the resistance, but it gets dark vision. And then the other thing they get instead of getting a resistance is they get forceful presence, which is based on an ability that dragons have, which I believe is frightening presence in dragons. Basically, for forceful presence, when you make a charisma, intimidation, or persuasion check, you can do so with advantage. And once you use this trait, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest. A lot of people think that is a pure role-playing thing because you don't use those in combat. But intimidating, there are actually rules for intimidating a foe to surrender in 5th edition, and it involves, I believe they have to be under half or under a quarter. They have to have low hit points, and you make a charisma intimidation versus, I think, their wisdom, something involving their wisdom. Yeah. So that's the Draconblood Dragonborn. Again, that one's a little bit more aligned towards casters and intelligence-based classes, so you could play a very different version of a Dragonborn that's very intellectual, which is cool. The other Dragonborn from Exandria is the Ravenite Dragonborn, which this one keeps the strength score increase of the base class, but they increase the constitution, which again, going back to that dragon breath that you still have access to, means that your dragon breath attack is going to be a little bit more powerful, or a little bit more difficult for enemies to evade out of. So that's really, really nice if you want to lean heavily into that. They get dark vision instead of the damage resistance, just like the other one. And they get vengeful assault. When you take damage from a creature in range of a weapon you're wielding, you can use your reaction to make an attack with the weapon against that creature. Once you use this trait, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest. So I've talked about action economy many times, and the fact that reactions are very, very useful, and so many classes don't use them. But if you can get a reliable way to use your reaction, it can be very, very useful because you're adding actions to your side. This gives you a pretty simple way to be able to get a reaction. And now, this is again a one and done kind of thing. But if you look at this from possibly something like a monk, where giving them an additional attack could mean they could stun the creature. And all it takes is you have to take damage from a creature in range of a weapon you are wielding. So they could be coming up to multi-attack you. They hit you once, and you're able to pow. It could be that you're getting hit with an area spell, and you happen to be close enough to be able to hit them. Pow. You can stun them and do things like that. So combining Vengeful Assault with some sort of ability or something that procs is the term we use in video games, but something that is based on an attack roll, like using a magic weapon that gets extra damage or does something interesting when you attack with it, can be incredibly useful and can definitely guide you on when to use that particular ability. In addition to that, with Vengeful Assault, especially if you decide to make a monk, that will mean Vengeful Assault, your Dragon Breath, and your key points all rely on short rests. So you can get a huge benefit from taking short rests that other classes won't. So the Ravenite Dragonborn is even more reliant on short rests than most of the Dragonborn. And again, if you take advantage of that, you can do very, very cool things. So that is going to be the only race that I go over, because this video is getting a little bit long. But the next few videos are all going to be dealing with race from the Player's Handbook, so we can talk about the new races in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Anyway, that is all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button. It really does mean a lot. Subscribe to the channel so you get all this right in your subscription box, and turn notifications on so that when I do post these things at weird times, you aren't going to miss it. In the comments down below, which flavor of Dragonborn do you think is the coolest? This can be the sub races, or even just the different draconic lineages that you can choose. Which one is your favorite? Which one do you think is the coolest? I will mention Dale Kingsmill, one of the coolest people ever, played a copper Dragonborn that was, I believe it was a greenish color instead of the traditional kind of copper-ish color, simply because she had oxidation on her scales. And when copper oxidizes, it has kind of a greenish bluish tint to it, if I remember correctly. So you can do cool stuff like that and be really, really interesting. But anyway, again, that is all for me, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.